Okay, so let's get started. I am so excited for this webinar, this Parkside Chat that we will be presenting today. Again, you are here for the 2025 Monarch Butterfly Population Count as well to learn more about the research from park staff. Next slide. And in the meantime, we know you have questions. Feel free to use the Zoom Q&A at the bottom of your screen. Please click on that Q&A button and then just type in your questions. We do have a Q&A section set towards the end. We will do our best to get to as many questions as we can. Here is your agenda for the day. We're going to have a welcome, a small intro about Parkside Chats. We'll introduce the speakers, they will speak, and then we'll have our Q&A with you all, and then our closing remarks. I am your host today, Shakayla Leonard. I am the Member Stewardship Manager, and I've been with California State Parks Foundation for almost 9 years. So it has been an amazing journey to be here at the foundation. I've learned so much and definitely have fallen in love with the state parks. My role here is to steward our members through events, as well as I oversee once the donations come in and making sure that they get acknowledged in a timely manner. So a little bit about California State Parks Foundation. We have been around over 55 plus years and we've been protecting California state parks. We were founded in 1969 by Penn Mott Jr. to be a partner to the California State Parks in protecting and preserving the California State Park system. Over 70,000 members and more than 300 million raised to support California's 280 state parks. Together, we have preserved habitats, defended against threats, and welcomed more people into the outdoors. Today, we remain steadfast in our mission to protect and preserve the California state park system for the benefit of all. Now, a little bit about Parkside Chats. This is a new virtual series for California State Parks Foundation. And the goal here is to bring together park lovers, experts, and community voices. We hope to offer insights on conservation, history, climate resilience, and park access. This is another way to stay connected to California's parks from wherever you are. We have a few formats like this one. It's a webinar. We'll also have some virtual tours of the actual state parks. We hosted our first one on August 27, 2025, and that was with a guest speaker by the name of Taylor Moore on honoring Indigenous heritage. You can go and see that webinar on our website or our YouTube channel. Now, without further ado, I'm so excited to introduce our speakers today. We have Dena Spatz, who is a senior environmental scientist with California State Parks. We have Stephanie Little, who is also a senior environmental scientist with California State Parks. And then we have Emma Pelton, who is a senior endangered species conservation biologist with Xerces Society for Invertebrate Conservation. Now we're going to just switch our slides quickly and then our guest speakers will begin their presentation. Thank you all.
Kayla, would you like me to jump in? I'm ready to go.
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much. Thanks for making it through my really long name of my title and our organization. We go by Xerces Society for short. You can go to the next slide. Thanks. Okay, thanks so much for having me today. I'm Emma with Xerces. And just for basics, if it's been a while since elementary school where you maybe learned the basics of the butterfly life cycle, monarchs begin life as a small egg. It's a very brief part of their cycle, just a few days. They then go through 5 instars or stages as caterpillars, molting each time to grow larger. And they're growing larger by eating their host plant milkweed. The Asclepius genus, and there's a wide range of species, native and non-native, that they use. And in California in particular, there's a lot of diversity of milkweed. But this is the plant that they need to eat to grow up and to make it to adulthood. So they have a very limited kind of set of requirements when they're caterpillars. They then become a chrysalis, which is the one cryptic stage. They're very flashy as caterpillars, like you can see here on narrowleaf milkweed. But when they go to that chrysalis stage, they can't defend themselves or hide, so they're more cryptic. This is often the one we see the least. Just kind of a plain green chrysalis, but it does have a very nice flashy gold detail. And then eventually they emerge as an adult butterfly, which we know and love. And this adult butterfly stage is actually a pretty brief portion of their life, especially if they were born in the spring and summer, just a few weeks, um, except for the overwintering generation that could live up to 9 months. 6 to 9 months is usually the range. So, really different strategy, and they're focused less on reproduction and much more on surviving the winter. And so, that's kind of the overall process in which they're using that milkweed. Once they're an adult, they're going to use not just milkweed flowers, but a wide range of native and non-native flowers for nectar. So monarch habitat when they're adults is a much wider suite of plants than just when they're caterpillars. Next slide, please. And this is a kind of a complicated figure that I just wanted to break down a little bit about what we're talking about when we talk about migratory monarchs. They're actually monarchs found in multiple continents, mostly because of spread over time into Asia, even into Portugal, into Australia. But North America and the Americas in general are really the natal population of monarch butterflies. And so this shows the range of migratory monarchs, Dena, plexippus, plexippus. They spend their winters right now, it's the kind of the tail end, either in coastal California, which you can see in red here, from Mendocino County down actually into northern Baja, Mexico, or in central Mexico in high elevation oil mill fir forests. So two very different strategies are overwintering. And we know that there are two major migratory populations, the eastern population that we think of as heading down to Mexico, and those butterflies were caterpillars east of the Rocky Mountains, versus our western monarchs, which were caterpillars west of the Rockies, and primarily overwinter on the coast. But we know that it's not quite that simple of a story. And I'll talk a little later on about how we know through innovative tagging technology right now that we're going to have some of our assumptions blown open about how clean this migratory distinction is. But overall, we think of the western population representing about 1/3 of the land area of their overall range, and the eastern is about 2/3. And the eastern population has always been orders of magnitude larger and really gets a lot of the glory. But I think you're all here today, and if you love California state parks, you know how important the overwintering population is and how important California is because they host both the overwintering part of the life cycle for Western monarchs, and those are the butterflies that then spread out between 4 and 6 generations throughout the West. So I'm up in Oregon, and we wouldn't have monarchs up here if we didn't have monarchs in California in the winter. And they play a double important role because it's also where the butterflies that are leaving right now, the overwintering sites, they're spreading out probably just, 50 or 100 miles inland to lay those first eggs and die. And then their offspring are the ones that will continue that migration. So California is important really for that overwintering population, that early spring population that then springboards the rest of the migration. Next slide, please. So zooming in a little more about overwintering monarchs, if you visited Natural Bridges, Lighthouse Field, Pismo, which we'll hear more about from Stephanie, you've seen this incredible phenomenon where monarchs really act quite differently than what I showed you with the breeding monarch life cycle, where they're relatively spread out and they're mostly seeking a mate or to lay eggs on milkweed. When they're overwintering, they're really focused on conserving their fat reserves. We actually think nectar is very limiting, and one of the great ways people can help is by bolstering the available nectar sources in the fall and winter. But those monarchs are focused much more on the strategy of just making it through the winter. So they are clustering together to protect themselves from predators, from harsh winds, from storms. And we also know that they want enough sun in especially midday where it can get above 55 degrees. To get that sun directly on the clusters helps their flight muscles warm up so they can fly and they can seek nectar to refuel, or they can move locations if maybe they're not overwintering in an ideal area. So overwintering habitat is incredibly unique because they rely on forested groves of trees, and they heavily rely on eucalyptus given its prevalence on the coast and its providing the right amount of shade and protection from wind. They're also using a lot of native trees, and we think historically they were using more of our native riparian areas further south that have largely been replaced by non-natives. So this habitat and why they use the trees they use, we don't fully understand. It also means it's somewhat irreplaceable. We have had some successful restoration projects that can bring habitat back, but in general, we can't create from scratch areas where monarchs will come and overwinter. So these are really special places. And this is why I think the role of state parks is incredibly important because we continue to lose sites, especially on non-park or non-public lands every year. Next slide, please. So one of my favorite things to talk about is the Western Monarch Count. Some of you may already be connected to this or be volunteers. Thank you. This is an incredible community science project. It's led by our staff, by Isis Howard on our team, who's up in Santa Rosa, and Sarah Quadra Vargas, who's down in Los Angeles. But it could not be done by just two people alone. It's really heavily based on volunteer and partner power. And it was developed in 1997 before we used terms like community or citizen science by three biologists, including one who's still with us, Mia Monroe, a retired National Park Service ranger in Marin County. And so we really took Mia's vision, and now Xerces helps lead this with, again, all of that support to get people out counting the butterflies, getting a good estimate of the population, and really documenting what the habitat is like, which can be very useful for managers when they think about what might need to happen or where there might be threats to a site. So if you want to learn more or join our e-newsletter, you can go to westernmonarchcount.org. But here's just a great smiling faces from this past season where we had volunteers out, getting kids involved, getting neighbors involved, and really having an opportunity for people to get to know the overwintering sites in their community. Next slide, please. And there are over 500 sites. So again, emphasizing we could not have two staff or really any entity doing this alone. You can see they're mostly focused in the coast, but we do have a few inland sites that are historic. We actually have some folks that backpack out and go to the Saline Valley, which is probably our most hardcore group because they have to go out the day before just to be there for that early morning count. But we really have an incredible set of volunteers, including someone in Baja, Mexico, who does those counts. And then we've got a few folks in the greater Phoenix area where there are small numbers of butterflies that cluster in Phoenix. So every year we add sites if we find them somewhere else, but we try not to drop sites unless the site, is completely destroyed. So we grow the number of sites every year, and that means we also have to grow the number of volunteers. Next slide, please. And so with that, we estimate we have 500 volunteers. We also have folks that we consider super volunteers. Some of them are doing this in their day job if they're associated with a natural history museum or a resource conservation district. We have many state park staff that are really key. They either monitor their own sites and or they take out volunteers to monitor more sites. So really incredible effort to get out to all these sites and as many as possible. And there are 3 monitoring periods. The early season, which we just started last year. So it's kind of a sneak peek about where the populations are headed at each site in October and early November. Our main overwintering count used to be called the Thanksgiving count, and we now call it our mid-season count, which is really our constant in terms of comparing populations from year to year. And then finally, we have a late season count that's just getting wrapped up, and those numbers should be out soon. Next slide, please. So all of that data together gets summed up into a database, which has all of the information, but we also try to simplify it and give just that snapshot of the mid-season counts so we can compare year to year. And just to break this kind of complicated figure down a little bit, before 1997, there were some counts done, mostly by professional biologists, but they were, just a handful of people. So they were only counting a handful of typically the largest sites. So based on data pre-1997 in the gray bars, Professor Elizabeth Krohn and Cheryl Schultz did an analysis about 10 years ago based on that early data and estimated, as you can see here, regularly, there were well over 1 million, upwards of 20 million butterflies counted in the 1980s. The 1990s, they saw a big decline, and this was actually the impetus for the count. The biologists were saying, okay, something's going on. We're not seeing the same numbers of butterflies. We need a better, more comprehensive census. So we started the Western Monarch count, and you can see that inset graph. Those are the raw totals, not estimates. The blue line shows the number of sites counted. So in general, counts are going up. We're seeing more and more people out. Counts, I mean, number of sites monitored. So effort was going up, but the number of butterflies was staying the same. And actually in the past few years gone down quite significantly. So of the past 5 years, 3 of those years have been the lowest counts on record. This past year, our mid-season count was just over 12,000 butterflies. So 12,000 butterflies compared to millions, it's easy to say that we've had about a 99% decline in the population since the 80s. Even if you want to use a different timestamp to start, we know that there's been really significant declines. Next slide, please. So this leads to their conservation status. And don't worry, we're going to turn the story around. It's not all bummer, but I do think we have to just start with the problem, which is that we have this huge issue. We continue to see these really heavy declines. It's listed, this is all migratory monarchs, not just Western, but under the IUCN, they're listed as vulnerable. Federally, which again doesn't consider East versus West, it lumps them together. It's a candidate species to be threatened. We anticipated there was going to be a listing decision in December. That's been delayed along with the delays of many other listings for other species that we know will qualify. So in the meantime, there's still a lot of work to be done. And California has really been a leader. It's not listed currently under CISA, but it is a species of greatest conservation need, which means that state agencies can focus on this species. And we've seen a lot of leadership from California State Parks, California Department of Fish and Wildlife on this topic. And legal protection is largely lacking, unfortunately. But there is some legal precedent for overwintering sites that are within the coastal zone to be considered environmentally sensitive habitat areas. And that's sometimes a legal tool that we see that's used to protect overwintering sites. But in general, it's a tool that's not kind of equally enforced or understood. So unfortunately, we continue to lose sites every year. So everyone acknowledging that this is a problem means we're working together to address these core threats. This figure kind of talks about all of the ways that we know monarchs aren't unique. Bumblebees, other butterflies, other invertebrates like fireflies and freshwater mussels face a slew of threats, and it's not just one thing. But for monarchs in particular, I wanted to emphasize pesticides, including the removal of their host plant milkweed through herbicides and our farming practices, as well as insecticides, which are widespread in our agriculture and also in our urban areas. There was a mass mortality event at an overwintering site in Pacific Grove just a few years ago. Habitat loss of both through that change in their host plant availability and also the overwintering sites. Monarchs like to use the coast, people like to develop on the coast. And so their use of a non-native eucalyptus tree can also pose a problem. And then finally, climate change is making this a little bit more difficult. We don't think it's a primary driver, but moving forward, we know that more severe winter storms, more severe weather, drought, fires probably make it harder for this declining population. I'll pass it over to you, Stephanie.
All right, actually, I'm going to jump in. Emma, thank you for that background information. I think a lot of our volunteers and super volunteers might be on this call, so thanks for joining us. Emma really, set this up really nicely, like I said. So I'm going to dive into, I work for California State Parks, and so I'm going to dive more into the role that State Parks plays in helping monarchs to be conserved during that overwintering period. Next slide. Okay, so across the state parks is home to more monarch overwintering sites than any other known land manager. And so that really makes it a significant player in overwintering site stewardship and monarch conservation. You see this map on the slide. This shows all the locations of the current and historic overwintering sites from the Mendocino coast all the way down to San Diego that are on state park lands. Next. And so we've estimated there's around 50 different overwintering sites in about 40 different state parks across the state. That's about 10% of all overwintering sites that we know of, thanks to the Western Monarch Count and all the mapping done by Xerces so far. Most of these 50 sites are actually actively used by monarchs, at least in the last few years. Unfortunately, because of the declines, that might not have been the case this year, but in general, most of them are actively used. Next. And then we also know that about 25% of all priority monarch sites that were identified by Xerces are actually on state parks. So that includes the famous sites at Pismo, Natural Bridges and Lighthouse Field in Santa Cruz, a variety of sites in Morro Bay. And all of these sites bring in hundreds of thousands of visitors each year coming in to see monarchs, which makes them especially important. But they're also identified as priorities because they're losing monarchs at unprecedented rates. So let's see, next slide. So relative to the overall state parks that they're in, an overwintering site is really just a small footprint in a larger landscape. And we do manage these groves a bit differently than we would in other parts of the park. So our park policies are very strong. They have strong protective measures for monarch butterflies. in general, even though generally our directives are really to protect and restore larger habitats at an ecosystem levels. We have sort of a special place for monarchs in our policies too. Next slide. So here's a really closer look at that grove footprint. So this example is from Andrew Malera State Park in Monterey. And the grove here is really represented with a core area in the middle where you can see those little dots are where monarchs are mapped to have been clustering. And then around that are the sheltering trees around that core area that provide those perfect habitat conditions that Emma mentioned before. They like a little bit of sun, not too much sun. They have very specific requirements. And so thanks to that mapping effort that Emma just mentioned, each one of these groves are outlined with a boundary. They're mapped throughout the state, and it really helps us have a better understanding of really where these groves are and what their structures are. Next. Yes, and there's also this potential designation of critical habitat for monarchs if the Fish and Wildlife Service does list them. So this includes a 500-foot buffer around the grove boundary that you can see in yellow. And this area should really be a supportive area that includes extra nectar resources, maybe some more wind screening by trees, and just an overall extra space that monarchs are using. And I guess I just wanted to point out that it's really our job as managers to understand this ecological footprint and the special conditions that monarchs need. And we can't just leave these groves the way that they are. We need to be actively managing, actively stewarding them over the time to maintain their quality and just to build up their resilience over time as well. Next slide. And this is all particularly important because change is real. These monarch groves, they're relatively old. The groves are made up of aging trees. Most of them are non-native fire-prone eucalyptus trees, and so there's a lot of ongoing threats. I'm just going to walk through a couple of them right now. We are experiencing a lot of tree losses, again, from those aging trees, or just a change in habitat quality because those trees are getting bigger, the canopy is changing where it is. There's also increased storm extremes, there's pests, there's diseases. So trees come down, that's a natural process, but it's just important to highlight because it's also happening within monarch groves. There's also fuels hazards from woody debris or downed trees that may have accumulated over time that just might present a fire hazard within a grove and threaten the integrity of the grove itself. Invasive plants pose an issue, like non-native grasses, for example. They might outcompete with where native plants might be able to thrive and provide appropriate nectar resources. And then, of course, habitat disturbance has always been an issue, as Emma pointed out. Within state parks, we might just have walkers going off trail that might further destroy habitat, step on nectar plants, or even a downed monarch if it's there. So that could be problematic. And then just, surrounding landowners may not be aware of that importance of the grove structure, including that supportive zone, or even maybe that there's trees on their own property boundaries that play a larger role in the overall structure. So I really like to point out to folks to go look up where the Xerces boundaries are and just get to know where monarch groves are that's around your local neighborhoods and just the places that you know well. It's a good thing to look at anyway. Next slide. Another threat I wanted to mention are predators, and an increasing one are yellow jackets. So they can actually directly attack monarchs, but they're not necessarily attracted to monarchs. They're really attracted to these groves inadvertently through trash and food that's left behind. So around picnicking areas or campsites, or even when these groves are surrounded by local neighborhoods like in Santa Cruz, any trash that's left behind could be attracting yellow jackets into a place, and then that also attracts them into the groves. So just something always to consider is to pack out your trash, leave no crumb behind. Our state parks way of saying that is to keep it crumb clean, and just make sure you're doing the same at your home, especially if you're a neighbor to state parks. Next slide. Okay, so there's lots of threats, but we have been addressing them, and there are known ways to do this. So we've been working with Xerces for a number of years through really large funding from the Wildlife Conservation Board and with supporting funds from the State Parks Foundation and the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. And with these funds, we've been developing habitat assessments of each of these groves, really led by Xerces and their team. These habitat assessments then inform management plans that then inform the management actions that we can take. Next slide. So example actions, there are a handful of different things that we can do at these groves that are directed by these plans. That includes monitoring, all the monitoring of monarchs, but also the habitat itself, enhancing habitat through tree thinning, fuels reductions, including doing some small controlled burns inside groves themselves can be very beneficial. There's lots of native nectar planting as well, native tree planting. We particularly want to plant locally sourced native plants that bloom during the appropriate periods when monarchs are at these sites, so in the fall and winter especially, and early spring. And of course, visitor management is an important action, like improving trails and signage. Next slide. Okay, so lots of work has gone into this to date over the last 5 to 7 years. There's been 32 habitat assessments developed. These have informed 19 management plans that are either complete or in progress right now. And from there, over a dozen different actions or a dozen different state parks or so have taken action from those management plans. And we are trying to continue to do this work into the future. The map that's been shown on this slide just shows sort of geographically where this work has been occurring. Next slide. Okay, we're just really excited by the hard work that's been done by staff so far in our parks, but more importantly by our community partners, by Xerces, by the resource conservation districts, our friends groups, the Parks Foundation, all the various volunteers and super volunteers that have gotten out there and gotten their hands dirty, really helping make these groves a better place and following these management plans. So really excited about that. Okay, let's see. Next slide. All right, I'm going to land on just saying that our work goes beyond our state park boundaries. So this is just one example that we are collaborating with a multi-agency group with 12 other state and federal agencies to really understand what are the gaps in our knowledge around monarchs and what are our priority actions. So over the last 2 or so years, we've been putting together a report that should be coming out next month. That makes recommendations for different actions that can be taken in 6 focal areas. So there's going to be recommendations about habitat restoration needs, research needs, of course, funding needs, and ways that you can participate. So keep a lookout for that coming soon. Next slide. And I'm going to kick it over to Stephanie to dive into a bit more detail about what they've been up to in Pismo.
All right, thank you, Dena. Hi, everyone. I'm Stephanie Little. I'm a senior environmental scientist, and I work at Pismo State Beach. I help monitor and manage the Pismo Monarch Grove. I'm going to be talking about all the good work that we're doing to protect and preserve overwintering habitat for monarchs. And as seen on this slide, we have a really robust management plan that guides the work that we do at the Grove, and I'm going to focus on a couple of those key components now. Next slide, please. So just to orient everyone, the Pismo overwintering site is adjacent to Highway 1 in between the city of Pismo Beach and Grover Beach. We're located in San Luis Obispo County. The yellow star on the right shows where we're located. We're basically a grove nestled between urban communities, a campground. You have the Pacific Ocean to the west. We're one of the largest overwintering sites in California. The grove itself is fairly small at only about 2 acres. And a majority of these trees were planted 150 years ago as a windbreak for surrounding artichoke fields. We know that monarchs have been using our grove since at least the mid-1940s. Our peak numbers were in the 90s. That peak count around that time was around 200,000 just at Pismo. I should mention I grew up on the Central Coast and remember visiting the grove when I was in elementary school. So I got to witness those high numbers. And here we are nearly 40 years later. I'm out there counting the butterflies as part of my job. This year, our high count was only 471. So a really sad and precipitous decline since the 90s. Next slide. I'm sure some of you have been to our grove, and if you haven't, please come visit. The butterflies are basically they've left for this season, but they'll be coming back mid-October. You'll see that we're not only managing our grove for monarchs, but also for visitors who come from all over the world to see these butterflies. We have a very active education and outreach program. We give walks and talks to the nearly 90,000 visitors we receive each year. Next slide. Monitoring monarchs, as well as site conditions, is a really big part of our management plan. You can see here our environmental scientist staff go out at least twice a month from October to February to get accurate monarch counts. There's at least 3 of us who work together to count the monarchs. We typically arrive around sunrise. We finish our count in a few hours. We're walking through the grove, searching every single tree, trying to document where the monarchs are clustering. Next slide. So we collect our data on our phones. And the screenshot on the left shows sort of a snippet of our data sheet, just a small snippet. The thing that sets us apart from other overwintering sites is that we're also collecting location data of the actual trees that the monarchs are using. So the screenshot on the right is basically showing the locations of over 300 trees at our site. Each colored dot represents a tree that's been GPS. So for example, the green dots, those are blue gum eucalyptus. The blue dots are Monterey cypress. So the cluster data that we're taking out there is georeferenced with the specific tree where they're found. This has allowed us to see which trees the monarchs are using over time and basically how their movements, showing how their movements sort of adjust throughout the season. Next slide. And then to demonstrate how the butterflies are using the grove, and David, you can push play. Yep, there we go. We took the clustering data from a couple surveys, well, actually, rather a couple seasons, showing how the monarchs are using the grove. So the orange circles that you're seeing are the locations. The bigger the circle, the bigger the cluster. You can see that the monarchs are really sticking to the interior part of the grove. They're kind of moving throughout as the season progresses. And again, knowing these locations, it really helps inform the restoration and protective measures that we implement at the grove each year. So that was, again, 2 seasons showing how the butterflies move throughout the season. Okay, next slide. So in addition to doing the monarch counts, we're really hands-on when it comes to restoration. We want to provide really high quality habitat for these butterflies when they're at our site. One of the struggles, though, that we have as resource managers is that we're managing a declining eucalyptus and cypress grove. Dena mentioned earlier, a lot of these trees are very, very old. I mentioned also that they were planted over 150 years ago. So they're falling. You know, we've had a lot of trees fall during winter storms. We've lost some really important ones, ones that the monarchs would return to each year. And we're realizing as we start losing these trees, we need to be planting new ones to plan for the future of this declining grove. So we've worked really hard to come up with meaningful restoration goals that align with state parks policies. Also, we're considering best available science. Next slide. And we're really strategically planting these trees so that we're providing important habitat functions within and around the grove. You can see here we involve lots of staff and partners during our planting days. And it's been really rewarding getting to see how, see the monarchs using some of these newly planted trees. They're adjusting. So really gratifying work. Next slide. And we've learned a lot from previous scientific research where we should be planting the trees. So for example, a couple years ago, well, not a couple, I guess time is flying. Several years ago, we planted 2 rows of Monterey cypress seen in this photo. Ultimately, we're hoping that these trees grow and provide extra wind protection for the monarchs, especially during the southeast storms that we get around here. Next slide. And another component of our management plan is to plant native vegetation that flowers in the fall and winter. So basically the monarchs have a source of nectar while they're at our site. Xerces has a really helpful nectar guide found on their website showing various plants and their blooming periods. I've actually referred to this guide when planting in my own backyard. The photos below are ones that were taken from our nectar garden out at the grove. We actually collect seed from our park. We grow those seeds in our greenhouse. And so everything is locally sourced and appropriate for our site conditions. Next slide. And with the thousands of visitors who come to the Grove each year, we're also managing the Grove in response to visitor safety. Each fall before the monarchs arrive, we hire an arborist to trim hazardous trees, and they're doing it in a way that's not affecting the important functions of the Grove. So the photo on the left shows the tree climber probably 80 feet up in the tree, trimming those hazardous limbs very carefully. And then the photo on the right are cormorant nests. Now, cormorants began nesting at the Grove sort of unexpectedly 2 years ago, and we're concerned by this recent activity because their guano will eventually kill these important trees. It's highly acidic, and so with continued use of these cormorants, we anticipate these trees could die in 5 to 10 years. Obviously, we can't have that happening. We're trying to find creative ways to deter cormorants from nesting in certain areas of the Grove. We're allowing them to nest kind of on the outskirts, but in the meantime, we're taking advantage of the tree climbers and having them take out old cormorant nests. We're hoping to kind of remove those nesting cues when the birds return the following year. So far, it's been helping, but it's been an ongoing struggle, and we're continuing to track and have discussions about that. Next slide. And then our work also extends beyond our boundaries, which are shown in yellow. The area outlined in red are eucalyptus trees that are managed by the railroad in the city of Grover Beach. Previous scientific research at our Grove highlighted just how important those trees are to the monarchs. They create a really important windbreak from the southeast storm winds. And there's been public pressure over the years to cut those trees down for various reasons I won't go into. So state parks, we're working really closely with those landowners, relaying the importance of those trees, trying to find creative solutions to manage them so that they're not all cut down. And so far, we've been successful in that. Next slide. So I've highlighted, some of the management and monitoring work that we're doing at Pismo. I really need to emphasize that this has been a huge team effort. State Parks does not do this work alone. We have dozens of partners. We depend heavily on community engagement. Thank you for being here today. We need your support and involvement more than ever, really. And at this point, I think I'm going to turn it back to Emma, who's going to sort of talk about a recent radio tagging study and ways you can be involved.
Great. Thanks, Stephanie. Love hearing about all the great work that Parks is up to. I'm going to totally shift gears and just say that I can't do this topic justice. We want to leave time for questions, but here's a QR code that I will talk a little slowly on this slide if you want to access it. We have a story map that explains this project in more depth. But just want to say there's some novel, really game-changing technology advances in radio telemetry that really just emerged in the fall. So this is brand new, but Xerces has been working with other partners, including consultants at Althouse and Mead. And collectively, we've been working closely with state parks, including Pismo, Gaviota State Park, Natural Bridges, and Lighthouse Field, along with some county and city parks, to really get this technology out to answer pressing management and policy questions around how monarchs use these overwintering groves and the urban matrix that many of them are situated in, so we can better use our resources. Managers have many overwintering sites often, as you've just heard. There's only so much time, there's only so much money, and so really understanding where monarchs are, how much they move between sites is a key question. And so we have been putting these small, lightweight tags, they're about the weight of 2 grains of rice, on the monarch thorax. You can see on this photo, actually a very tiny solar panel and then a long antenna. There's been some foundational work by James Madison University to show these tags can be applied without harming the butterfly. We actually use an eyelash glue, like a fake, if you're going to apply fake eyelashes, we use a specific type of fake eyelash glue. I love that little bit. And we really like the brush too. It's like a win-win. So it's non-toxic for the butterfly. You apply this tag. They can still nectar, fly, mate. There's still studies to make sure we're doing the least harm as possible, but so far it looks really good. And we can actually tag these butterflies and then see how they move in real time. And if you want to download the Project Monarch app, it's available for free for Android and iPhone, cellular devices, tablets. And this really allows us to track individual butterflies. So as a collective with a scientific collecting permit from CDFW and a really strong set of research questions, we tagged about 70 butterflies this past fall. Some of them are still flying. They've made it. So 80 to 90 days later, we're still tracking some of these butterflies. Next slide, please. So here's a screenshot from the app. This is a few days old when I pulled this, so I know ML017 has moved since then, but you can see where these butterflies are in real time. Partners at CDFW also did some tagging in the East Bay, so you'll see some activity up there. But we're really, at this point, we did not know that these tags would work as well as they did because they're relatively new. We didn't know if they would last till spring, but they still seem to be pinging, and we have butterflies actually leaving overwintering sites, undergoing spring dispersal. And we plan to publish a paper and really think about management implications and share that all with the community. But it's still early. We're just pulling down our equipment right now. But here's a little snapshot and some of the early takeaways that those butterflies represented on the left. You see an individual. That red star is where the butterfly was tagged, in this case at Lighthouse Field. The blue dots are where a device was that picked it up. So there's a little error associated with this. Each blue dot may not be the exact location of the butterfly, but the range to pick them up is a few hundred feet in most conditions, so pretty close by. You can see the butterfly spent a lot of time at Lighthouse Field, but you can also see went inland into Santa Cruz proper. So this really emphasizes how much they're moving away from state parks property and then coming back. So emphasizing the importance of state parks, but also the importance of neighbors in really supporting these overwintering butterflies. And now you see looks like it's conveniently following the highway up the coast. It could again be a little bit skewed by where devices and people are, but incredible. And if you go to a grove and you open this app, you can actually collect data. I was out 2 weeks ago, and we were able to pick one up at Lighthouse Field. So there's still a few of these butterflies out, and there's plans to have another round of this tagging to answer more questions next year. So stay tuned. Next slide, please. So other ways you can help besides our cool tagging project is really iNaturalist. If you're not familiar, it's a great platform for lots of different, not just insects, but plants, fungi. So I'm just a huge fan of iNaturalist, but we have a specific project called the Western Monarch Milkweed Mapper within iNaturalist, where we can track these butterflies, not just the tagged ones. So anytime you're out and you see a milkweed or a monarch, you can add that data to the database. And here's a snapshot of data from iNat of where monarchs and milkweeds are. Really does it's used by researchers, and it's used by community scientists who maybe want to understand where there's milkweed to do seed collection or where butterflies might be showing up in their area. And there's a QR code there for inaturalist.org if you want to get the app or check it out on the website. Next slide, please. And then other ways you can help. Stephanie mentioned Xerces.org. We have a lot of great free resources. One thing I want to highlight we just rebooted is our native plant seed and services directory. So if you're looking to do restoration or even just plant in your yard, and you want to know where there's native milkweed local to your area, you can check that out. We also have those nectar plant guides, information for talking to your nursery about sourcing bee-safe plants, which are lower in pesticides, and then maybe just how to get started with planting and establishing breeding habitat for monarchs. Next slide, please. And then in terms of where is most important to do what, there is a great resource called the Priority Action Zones Map, which was developed by Xerces and state parks and many other partners whose logos are down there. It's really a shared vision of what people can do where. It's a great short handout. So if you want a little more information, we really kind of try to break it down by area and talk about that early breeding zone, which again, the tagging data may reveal a little more narrow of a range. So we're excited to see how far they disperse. But right now, we largely think they stay in the Coast Range and the Central Valley for this early period. So that's really our focus for early season milkweed and nectar resources. And then the rest of the state being really important for those later generations. And then we have that kind of buffered area along the coast to think about that overwintering part of the cycle. Next slide, please. And then just want to make a plug. This is not appropriate for individuals' yards, but we have this habitat kit program where Xerces gives hundreds of plants away to individuals or groups, and it has summed up to over 100,000 plants given away, including native milkweed. It really provides that kind of one-stop shop for people to get plants and get a project idea and get going, and save hundreds or thousands of dollars getting the right sort of plants for their area. You're eligible if you're working on public lands, working lands like farms or ranches, urban gardens, schools, tribal lands, and natural areas. And we have a special emphasis to support community-oriented projects and under-resourced individuals and communities. So you can check it out. We have these actually outside of California as well, but California has been kind of the original. I think we're almost 10 years into this Habitat Kit program, and applications just launched. And I think you have until mid-April to apply if you're interested. Next slide, please. And finally, I think we just wanted to all land on a how to help note. This is just a list. I think we could add more, but these are just some of the ideas of how people can contribute. Just planting locally appropriate native plants, thinking about pesticides. We didn't talk about that as much, but it's definitely a major one, especially when we think about the role that neighbors have, that these butterflies are out on the landscape and getting exposed. And we had this mortality event happen on a neighboring property at Pacific Grove. We know this is a risk. Thinking about that, food resources for predators that Dena brought up with yellow jackets. If we can lower mortality at overwintering sites, it really has an exponential impact on the population. Every butterfly that makes it through the winter can contribute kind of to such a greater degree to the overall population. Spreading the word, Western monarchs, in the 99% decline, I think is something that many people know, but we can still emphasize. And try to really get people to understand. If you're in coastal California and you see butterflies, if you see monarchs a lot, this may be kind of hard to wrap your head around, but really understanding that, getting people to think about how to help. Great community science opportunities, volunteer, connect with state parks, friends groups, others that might, some hands-on ways to get involved. And then engaging with local community groups and politicians. There's a lot more need to continue to focus on this issue at many scales, including protecting overwintering habitat. Thank you. I think that's it for us.
All right. Thank you so much, Emma, Dena, and Stephanie. That was just so informative. I love monarchs, of course, in my background, but just to hear about the threats, the solutions, and most importantly, that it really is a team effort, a lot of partners involved, the community being involved. So it's just very insightful to hear that information and get the resources on how we can help as a community. So now we're going to turn it over to the audience. We want to hear from you. We've been monitoring your questions in the chat, and we have about 5 to 10 minutes, if that, for questions. We may not be able to get to all your questions because we want to make sure we end at 1. And if we don't, we'll be sure to follow up with some of the questions that go unanswered. Okay. So the first couple of questions get on the topic of milkweed. So the first one is, can monarchs eat any type of milkweed?
I can take this one. Yeah, so I think there haven't been like comprehensive tests to say every single type. There's over 70 species. So there's a few that there's no documented evidence that they use, but I'm not aware of any of those like question mark species being in California. So I think all of our California milkweed species they can use, and they can also use some of the non-native balloon plant or tropical milkweed that is commonly found in California.
Sounds good. Thank you. I know that's like a common question, so it's great to have an answer for that. A follow-up is, I've heard that Xerces Society has recommended not planting milkweed if one lives within 5 miles of the ocean and north of Santa Barbara. Can you explain if this is still the case, and if so, why? We have a community member that says there isn't science behind this, but I trust Xerces.
Thanks. Yeah, this is a great question. I think this is one of those ones where it's a little bit gray. So we often are trying to both give people a clear answer, like a clear rule of thumb, saying, okay, 5 miles relative to the Pacific coast north of Santa Barbara is generally outside of milkweed's range. So there's not a lot of evidence in looking at CalScape. And if you talk to like local botanists, Milkweed does not typically grow really close to the ocean in some parts of that northern coast. So that's where that recommendation came from. Is it the biggest risk if someone plants, especially native milkweed, slightly outside of the range? I don't think so. So I think it's just in terms of recommending to people like we're trying to follow nature's patterns and plant plants where they belong, especially at scale. And we wouldn't want to see an overwintering site land manager plant a whole bunch of native milkweed thinking that they're helping when really that's not where the butterflies would naturally be reproducing. But in terms of it being a big risk, if someone puts a native milkweed plant in their garden, we're not as concerned about that. So I think we both try to give people that information so they can make the best decisions possible. But I think when it comes down to an individual garden scale, probably low risk in any regard. And so we definitely recommend checking out that priority zone map. I said it has kind of a simplified answer for what I just rambled on about. If people want just like the simplified, like here's what state parks and CDFW and Xerces says, and it kind of goes into that a little less nuance, but I wanted to just give the more nuanced answer because sometimes the rule of thumb answers help, and sometimes I think people go, well, this isn't quite right for my area. And like, of course, you know your area best and make the best decision.
Thank you. And thank you for providing that resource. One of another questions around milkweed was, is there a good, easy way to site to understand and get information on how to best manage backyard monarch slash milkweed habitat?
That again goes to you, Emma. I think you spoke about the Xerces.org website. There's amazing resources there, or even if you just look up, the word Xerces with monarch and milkweed, you'll get some great resources popping up.
Thank you. And we'll be sure to highlight some of those resources as well in our follow-up email. I know we can't capture them all here, so thank you for that. Another question is, what species of trees do monarchs prefer? I know we talked about the trees and the locations, but more interested in the species of the trees.
Okay, I can start that one. Feel free to jump in, Stephanie and Emma. We've been mentioning eucalyptus in our conversations here as a tree that was planted 50 to 100 years ago for different purposes and ended up attracting monarchs into these groves. But so that's primarily blue gum eucalyptus, which is a non-native species. There's some other eucalyptus species as well that they like, but that's the primary one when you are in these groves. There's native trees too, though. And so there's native cypress, Monterey pine. They will also cluster in some redwood trees as well. Oak trees and sycamores have also had overwintering monarchs stopping over, maybe not necessarily clustering, but they use that as well.
And I should also mention it is not state park policy to be planting non-native species, but given the precipitous decline of the monarchs, we have taken exceptions to our own rule, and we are planting in within existing footprints, limited use of eucalyptus. We're using a species different from blue gum that doesn't self-propagate, and so we're not expanding the territory of the eucalyptus in our area. It's just limited use within the existing grove within that footprint. We've tried other species. We're, also planting Monterey cypress, but the soil conditions are such that it's really hard to grow oaks and some of the other species that they probably traditionally clustered in. So at this point, everybody is really steering us towards planting eucalyptus in limited applications for some of these sites.
Thank you. And speaking of eucalyptus tree, we have a couple of questions around that. So the eucalyptus trees are non-native. Do we know if monarchs overwintered in on the California coast before those trees were brought here?
think I can go for it. I think any of us could. This has been a huge question of like, what was their distribution before there was eucalyptus? And there's been a historical ecology project completed by the San Francisco Estuary Institute that tried to dive in more on this. And I thought that they came up with some really compelling evidence, really, of how monarchs even were in Southern California before eucalyptus in riparian areas. So again, sycamore, oak. So we think they were using a lot more native trees, redwoods, but they may have had more limited range and may have expanded their footprint with the introduction of eucalyptus.
Thank you. So I do notice we're at time for questions, but I want to just do one more question, and then we're going to wrap it up. Again, as I said, if we haven't responded to all the questions, we will do our best to do a follow-up for those answers. And so the last one around eucalyptus was, does anyone know why overwintering monarchs are so attracted to the non-native eucalyptus trees?
It's one of those things like we wish we could understand why monarchs make the decisions that they do. These little charismatic insects that we all love so much, and we also just don't really understand like what drives their attraction to a certain place. We really do we understand like the habitat, like microhabitat qualities that Emma described. They are attracted to that, and it's sort of like at a macro level, but like very specifically, it's so hard for us to know, which is why it's hard to just develop a monarch habitat. We don't know for sure if they're going to be attracted there versus someplace else. So we're just working off of the knowledge that we have, and sort of just putting together our best practices for where they might go.
Thank you. And again, this has been such an amazing webinar, the topic. Before we close, is there any other thing you would just like to stress for us to know, the community to know, before we close?
I think we did say this earlier, but it's fun to recap. There is just so much that everyone can do. You can use iNaturalist on your phone when you see a monarch, take a picture, submit that, because we're trying to see where are people seeing monarchs when. Maybe it's a monarch in a place we didn't know it should be, or maybe it's at an earlier time than we thought they would be there. It's just such a great, easy tool to use. So I just suggest using that. And some other of the messages, keeping it creme clean, not leaving trash behind. It's important for all wildlife, not just monarchs, but it supports them as well. And of course, Emma gave some great tips of what you can do in your backyard and the Xerces resources you can go to. Stephanie or Emma, did you have anything else you want to add?
All right. Again, thank you, Emma, Stephanie, and Dena. And so we would love to talk a little bit about how to get involved with California State Parks Foundation and just learn more about topics like this, like the Monarch and some of the work that we are doing with state parks. Please visit our website at calparks.org, sign up for our email newsletter, volunteer in the state park. We have plenty of work days at different state parks. Donate or become a member, sign a petition, and of course, follow us on social media. Facebook, Instagram, Sky Blue, Blue Skies, and LinkedIn. And with that said, that is a wrap. Again, thank you so much. This was lovely. And we will be sending out an email of this recording as well as a survey. Please take the survey as we want to get feedback so we can continue to do Parkside Chats. Until next time.